Bible verse they heard.
What was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah?
Version is the message.
What does the Bible itself
Which
say?
meant you had to depend on your neighbor. How many of you have gone to your neighbor and asked for sugar lately?
Who can identify the first time they heard the Bible used against them?
Thou shalt not lie with another man the way one does with one, so they paraphrase a little bit.
Right.
Things like that.
Good. We can only look at things from our own viewpoint. I am steeped in the Catholic tradition. That literal interpretation of the Bible, for me, at that time, was freedom. Because I saw people actually putting into practice what was located in that book. That's the bias I'm coming from. So I talk in positive terms about some of the things that the religious right can do. Which, none of us fit into boxes here at MCC, so that's not a box that works. Okay, that is our intro. I'm going to turn it back to Pat so she can continue giving us some background.
Shirley very eloquently, and I loved that exercise that you just had us do because it really did a visual to where we come from. We have all been raised within our different churches. Everyone here appears to have been raised in church in one form or another. Some of us might have gone twice a year, the High Holy Days. I always wanted to put little trackers on people at Easter and Christmas and see where they go, the months in between those times. Some of us might have done that. Our families might have gone, taken us to church twice a year. Others of us might have gone on Sundays, one service. Some of us might have gone Sundays and then Wednesdays and did in-between things. We had different experiences growing up, but it became our community. Our church, in one form or another, became our community. Whether it was a distant community or a real embracing everything you did centered around the church and the church experience. As I said a few moments ago, and as Shirley highlighted very well for us, we come with perspectives. I think it's important for us to understand, as I believe that everyone in here primarily identifies as Christian. Some of us might identify as eclectic or otherwise. But we all come with some type of a Christian understanding to life. And some of us expanded upon that. But I think it's important for us to go beyond just what is presented in our childhood and what is just presented in the media about Christianity. Some of the things that I think are important for us, especially as we move forward into this discussion, is that we as Christians today follow the teachings of a Middle Eastern outcast in the very area of the world where there is conflict going on right now. He was not a white guy from Europe. He was more of a very short black guy, Palestinian. He was a Palestinian Jew in the Middle East, what we refer to as the Middle East. He was raised in the area that we now know as Israel, and in that general vicinity. He lived in a different time and in a different culture. Not right, not wrong, just different. Shirley alluded to the fact that we live our lives in boxes. And I think it's very important for us to understand as we look at Scripture and as we are taught about Scripture, that we all come from it with different perspectives. We've taken teachings of 2,000 years and put our filters on. She said her filters were Catholic filters. There's others of us that come from a European filter. There's others of us that come from an African filter. There's those of us that come from a South American filter. We come with different filters because of our family backgrounds into the place that we are now. Christianity has done the same thing. I think many of the televangelists today would be aghast if they realized that Christianity at the time shortly after Jesus' death was more diverse than it is today. Christianity shortly after the time of Jesus' death was actually more Jewish. It was just a different sect of Judaism. The original Christians were simply a different sect of those in the Jewish faith. the Jewish faith and those who were raised in the Middle Eastern culture were just that, a Middle Eastern culture. Very different than what we have today. One of the things we're going to be hearing a lot more about in just a few moments is that hospitality first and foremost. Community, it was very different than today. How many of us have our families still living, how many of us still live with or within 5 miles of our family? It would have been unheard of for us to live 5 miles from our family. Okay, that's just a number one. How many people do you think that you meet within a year here? I know I come in contact with literally thousands of people, whether it's in this, just passing, seeing people on the street, or face-to-face interactions. Our ancestors 2,000 years ago maybe had interactions with 200 people. A very different environment, a very different environment. Great wisdom is birthed in that area, and that is what we have tried to take with us and to interpret and to make real and alive today. One of the things that we have to realize is that these were a desert people. How many of you have ever lived in the Southwest or in the desert? It's a different experience in LA, isn't it? Where'd you live?
Palm Springs.
Tucson. Palm Springs. I was in New Mexico. It's a very different experience than here, than living in the city. I never understood it until I lived there. I'm originally from the Bay Area. Living in the desert is a very, very, very different experience. You are not surrounded by the wealth and abundance that one might be in a valley, if you will. The culture was a desert community, which meant you had to depend on your neighbor. How many of you have gone to your neighbor and asked for sugar lately? For baking. You know? We don't even do that, do we? It's very rare that we interact even with our own neighbors. That was unheard of. There was all the time interaction going on. What's all this mean, and how is this important to this? That's how people experienced God. God was an ever-present. It wasn't a Sunday thing. It was an ever-present. There was no distinction between body, mind, and spirit. There was no distinction between body, mind, and spirit. It wasn't until about the 2nd century that the Greek influence came into the Middle East and kind of imposed, and it was kind of an imposition because the Romans were taking over. We know that when Jesus grew up, he was in a land that was taken over by Romans that had a whole different way of looking at the world. You know, Jesus' people had a different way of looking. Everything was integrated. God was one with everything, every breath you took. There was no discussion about what was better. Was male better, female better,